Welcome. So pleased that you're here. I'm Dr. Elizabeth McMahon. This is the fourth and final module of a four-module class in psychological first aid. So let's just quickly go over, what's been covered and the general information. The course is being recorded for future use, and feel free to disable your video. All participants are in mute, so you use chat for if you have a question, and there'll be some time at the end, and I'll try to see if I can monitor the chat as well. You may have a worksheet. There were worksheets provided for some of the modules. If so, please have that available, because I want you to walk out of here, and whether or not you have a worksheet, there are things you're going to write down and think about and take with you after today's session, because today we are focusing on preventing burnout. So not just dealing with stress, although yes, part of the tools help with stress, absolutely. And not just, dealing with, say, victims, survivors of disaster, but what can you do to make your life less stressful, to help protect yourself against the burnout, and to basically make life happier, improve your quality of life. I've taken the research here not only from clinical expertise, but also from the research in an area of psychology called positive psychology, which doesn't study how to fix problems. It studies what correlates with lives most worth living, with the people who say, not only am I not having problems, I feel like I'm thriving. So life happiness. Okay, and I'm glad somebody is already saying that they found this course helpful, and I'm sorry you needed it, and I'm glad it was here for you. So let's talk about what we've done so far, right? There are four modules here, and the first one really focused on coping with stress. And then it was making fast connections with people, and then dealing with difficult, challenging, expectable, predictable reactions with other people. And then this one's on avoiding burnout. So they all build on one another. And in fact, the first one had you learn about the common effects of stress, your own personal stress signals, skills that can help reduce stress and increase your coping and your resilience, went over the signs of problematic or traumatic reactions, and gave you further resources. It taught some specific skills, the 4 for calm breathing, the diaphragmatic breathing, the time to take 5, the mini mindfulness, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, use of imagery, and you had your own personal stress management worksheet that you created. The second module focused on how to make a fast, effective connection, how to come across in ways that will make you most effective, how to present yourself physically, verbally, vocally as calm, caring, and competent, how to connect quickly, how to give instructions in a way that increases the chance of compliance, and your own self-talk, realistic, supportive self-talk to support yourself. PFA, actually, it says 4, it should be PFA 3, was handling the predictable, challenging reactions that people do have when they are extremely stressed. Everything from being temporarily overwhelmed to being angry. And now we're up to module 4, which really focuses on you and you finding ways to make your life better, your work more satisfying, to help give you some armor and some tools and some weapons against the negative impacts of stress and to reduce the chance of burnout. So in this module, I'm going to talk about ongoing stress as opposed to acute stress, give you a number of tools to help protect yourself from the negatives and find ways to decrease the negatives in your life. Talk about how you solve, what techniques work when you have a solvable problem, and what can you do when it is an unsolvable problem. And then I'm going to end with actions known to increase positive quality of life, positive emotions, and all the benefits that positive emotions bring. And finally, you'll get a couple of resources if this really piques your curiosity and gets you excited and you want to learn more. So let's start with, what do I mean when I talk about ongoing stress? So ongoing stress is basically, it's either prolonged or repeated crises. You don't get a break. It's one after another, or it's sustained. So whether that's dealing with a pandemic, whether it's after an earthquake, whether it's repeated fires in fire season, or it can be ongoing prolonged stresses like prolonged or repeated understaffing, lack of resources, lack of support. If you have to repeatedly deal with scenes of violence, injury, trauma, death, grief, loss, or if you have repeated or prolonged deployments. These are sort of ongoing stress. So take a second, reflect on your work and what you do. And are you subjected to the occasional acute stress? Or are you under ongoing stress? Remember to use all the coping skills that were taught in the first 3 modules. They're all still good, right? But let's talk about, an acute stress is difficult. It can cause anxiety, it can cause physiological arousal, it can cause emotional responses. But it's ongoing stress that really seems to correlate with burnout. So the way I think of burnout is I just think that the negatives have just outweighed the positives. So I'd like you to just reflect on where you are right now in terms of the emotions in your life. So how often, from 1, well, rarely, sometimes, but it's rare, to 5, almost all the time, how often do you feel stressed, tense, or anxious? And I want you to write down these numbers for yourself. Nobody's going to see them. Nobody's going to know them. I'm not going to ask you. But I want you to do this for you. So this is you're taking your emotional temperature. How often are you feeling uncertain or worried? How often are you feeling guilty, self-critical, self-blaming? What about frustrated, irritated, angry, resentful? You're feeling dislike or discouraged, negative, pessimistic, or hopeless. So take a look at those numbers. And now think about these negative emotions and what's their general trajectory. If you were to graph them over time, are you having less of them over time? Are you stable? You're having about the same amount. They're not going down, but they're not going up, but they're not going down. Or are they increasing over time? Where are you going? Where are they taking you? And similarly, take a look at the positive emotions. How often in the course of your work or your daily life do you feel a sense of excitement, pride, accomplishment? Or a sense of confidence, calm, right? Or a sense of feeling grateful or feeling appreciative or appreciated? How often do you feel liking, love or feeling loved, acceptance or feeling accepted, offering support or being supported? What about, do you feel positive, hopeful, encouraged, optimistic? And how often do you feel in control, as though things are balanced and you're able to cope? And write down the numbers for those positive emotions. How frequent are they in your life at this time? And now do the same thing. Are you having fewer and fewer of these emotions as time goes by? Are they at a stable level? And are you comfortable and happy with that stable level? Or are they increasing? So when you look at yourself and your emotional balance, how does that weigh out between the frequency, the intensity, the duration of your negative emotions and your positive emotions? We all have both. We will always have both. There is good and bad in everything, and there always will be. But if the negative emotions are increasing and the positive emotions are decreasing in frequency or duration or intensity, then there's a problem and you're on the path to likely burnout. So let's talk about things that you can do to prevent that. We know that when you can decrease the negative emotions of any kind, and when you can increase positive emotions of any kind, it's going to help prevent you from feeling burned out. So first, we're going to tackle decreasing negatives. And then we're going to tackle increasing positives. One of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm going to say, think about 3 ways to overall decrease negative emotions. And within those 3 ways, there are going to be, separate different techniques and approaches. But, general, you want to start out and you want to say, well, do I have a problem that is solvable, that can be solved? Can I fix it, right? And then you want to, in all of our lives, there are going to be things we can't fix, people we can't change, situations we can't change. So what do you do for the unsolvable problems? Well, there are things that you can change inside. And then finally, how do you protect yourself just physically? Physical self-care. So let's start with, think about what stresses you and write down, what and who are the problems you face? What makes you feel angry or unsupported or frustrated or hopeless or sad or, overwhelmed? And write those down. And it could be anything from paramedic to, understaffing, to fire season, to dealing with the homeless, to not having enough resources for, fill in the blanks, sick people, homeless, victims of fires, right? Write those down. And then take a look at the list. And maybe it stresses in your personal life. That's fine too. These techniques work there. So when you've written down at least one thing that you're able to identify that is a stress in your life, let's see, do you have the option to raise your hand? I'm not seeing it. So maybe just put yes in the chat. So if you've written down if you've identified at least one stressful situation, and I'm not going to ask you what it is, you're going to keep it entirely private. I just want to make sure I've given you enough time. Good. Because the more specific you are, the more you got a specific problem in mind, the more you can think about how you're going to apply these tools. And they become less theoretical and more concrete and practical. So what are your 4 options? Now, let me warn you, I changed the wording of these slides just a little bit. I'm going to send the updated slide deck to Brian, and he's going to make it available to you. There are not any changes in the tools, but I just wanted to think about that, when there's stress, I basically think with any stressful or distressing situation, you've only got 4 buckets to put it in. Can you change? Can you change something that's under your control so that it becomes less stressful, less upsetting? Great. That's bucket number 1. Well, bucket number 2 is if you've changed everything you can that you can change and you're still having stress or distress, then you go to bucket number 2, which is maybe your body's telling you something. Maybe your emotions are telling you. Maybe you need to leave. But there are things that we choose not to leave, or that we may not be able to leave. You can't choose to not have a chronic illness that you've got. You can't leave that. You may have caregiving obligations, professional obligations that you choose not to leave, that you can't leave. You may need to work 2 jobs until you get through school, or until you pay off the mortgage, until the kids are out of college, right? So first, you change everything you can. Bucket number 2 is if you can't change it, can you leave it, or do you choose to leave it? And if you change everything you can, and you know why you're not leaving, then the 3rd bucket, the only one that's left that's any good, is to accept that you're doing this for a good reason, and then protect yourself to minimize the emotional distress in response to the situation. Because bucket number 4 is an ugly bucket. Bucket number 4 is stay upset. You don't change it, you don't leave it, you don't accept it. You just stay upset over and over and over again, like banging your head against a brick wall. The brick wall doesn't move and you just get bloody, right? This is bad for your mental and your physical health. So let's start with changing. So for solvable problems, think about the stress, briefly vent. I'm a fan of venting briefly. Listen to your emotions, listen to what you're thinking, get it out, and then step back and decide, what are you going to do? What bucket does it go into? And if it goes into the, I think I can change this to make it better bucket, then put your energies there, not into venting over and over, repeatedly. That's more the stay upset bucket. You don't want to live in that bucket. So write down, start to think about, what could you do? What could you actually do? Who might help you? Could you brainstorm with somebody? Are there people you could consult about ways to solve it, ways to make it better? Can you prioritize if there are a few minor issues, but there's one thing that's really like a pebble in your shoe? Can you go after that one? And then make your best plan, getting all the allies and the support and the consultation that you can and that you need, and then work the plan, follow the plan, and take action. Look for all the help you can, lobby, negotiate, use assertive communication where you ask for what you want and then you listen to what they want, and then you negotiate. So if you got a solvable problem, or even a solvable piece of a problem, really think about what you can do, and equally important, who can help you? Who can help you change things? And if you've got a solvable problem, I want you to write down 1 or 2 specific steps, tiny little steps. It could be, I'm going to talk to this person. I'm going to look this up on the internet. I'm going to, ask somebody for help. I'm going to, whatever, speak up. But even just having a plan reduces your stress because you feel less helpless. You feel more in control. you know what you're going to do. And knowing what you're going to do, having a sense of what you're going to do, it relieves some of the helplessness and it makes you feel more resilient and more hopeful. So if you got a solvable plan, make a plan and work your plan. So let's talk about if there's a solvable plan. Obviously, you're writing it down as a problem because it bothers you, right? So let's talk about getting angry, irritated, frustrated, pissed off about what's going on. So, no, anger can be very positive. It energizes you to take effective action. That's productive anger. Anger can also be a pitfall because, like any strong emotion, fear, anger narrows your focus so that you find yourself only thinking about and focusing on those aspects of the situation that make you angry. So you're not taking a large perspective. You can ignore or even actively misinterpret and distort someone else's words or actions of this situation. And it can get you into this all or nothing, what's called cognitive rigidity, very narrowed focus of you're either with me or you're against me, friend or foe. Plus, because it's energizing, it can be self-sustaining in a way that is destructive to you. I think we've all met people who tend to be chronically angry and negative. And we know that that's harmful for the body and certainly not conducive to happiness. And chronic anger is not necessarily conducive to action, right? It needs to be channeled anger. So if you find yourself really angry, when you get annoyed or impatient with anybody, step back and think about what we talked about last session, that anger is a secondary emotion, that anger is a response to something that comes first. That's usually pain or threat, a danger, a worry, a fear, a sense of pain and hurt, which can be a psychological or moral pain, that it feels unfair, or things are not right, or that it's disrespectful. So if you're finding that there are people or things that really make you angry, take a second, write down what triggers, what are my triggers? And then what's underneath that? Why am I angry about that? Am I feeling hurt? Am I feeling threatened in some way? And am I telling myself things about the person in this situation that, again, narrow it to friend, foe, right, wrong? People are against me if they're not for me. Are they idiots? They're jerks. They're and then go and ask yourself, just because I think it, just because it makes me angry, doesn't necessarily mean it's true. There's a saying in cognitive behavioral therapy. It goes, don't believe everything you think, particularly when the thoughts come with a huge surge of emotion. When we get really scared, we may not necessarily be seeing the full picture. When we get really angry, we see. So, is what I'm saying about this person absolutely true? Do I know that 100%? Does all the evidence support it? And could a reasonable person see this differently? And if so, how might that person see it differently? Not that you would change your view, but to at least broaden the perspective. And then really ask yourself, right? Is this helping me or hurting me to be angry? And particularly to stay angry, right? Is it giving you the energy and the motivation so that you take effective and productive action towards solutions? Is it helping you? Or is it hurting you? In terms of just you, emotionally, physically, in terms of your relationships, and in terms of achieving whatever your goal is. So when there's a problem that your efforts can solve, harness that energy, make a plan, turn to people for support, and try to solve it. That being said, there are a lot of problems in our life that are not going to be solved, that we can't solve. So take a second and think about, particularly with the work that you do, what are those situations that you can't solve? And there's a really interesting question that came up with, are there any suggestions for people who are convinced they can change something, but change it is not really a viable option? If you're dealing with someone who's convinced that they can change it or that it can be changed, what can you do? Well, the first option that's in this question is it best to help them focus on an aspect that can be changed? And yes, I think so. I think my first recommendation pretty much always is look at what's under your control, what's in your power to change, to make better. Because remember, you kind of go through steps. What can I change? If I can't change it sufficiently, do I want to leave? Can I leave? Do I choose to leave? And if I can't change it sufficiently and I'm not going to leave, then I need to accept that this is the current reality. Perhaps in the future, things might change. I might be able to make a difference later. But if this is the current reality, then, if it's ever you against reality, reality is going to win. So you really are better off accepting that if this is how things are, this is how things are, and how are you going to cope? Right? So, right, how are you going to cope? So it shifts more from external, how can I get the outside to change, to internal. And there are a couple of ways to change your internal responses so that the external does less harm to you. So I'll talk about three general categories of approaches. One is adjusting your expectations, because our words, our thinking, our expectations, they program our brain and our body and our emotions, right? Another is ways to broaden your perspective, to see it in a larger perspective. And then third, really focusing on it, changing your self-talk, what you say to yourself about what's going on. So take them one at a time. If you can't change it the way you want and you're not going to leave, then you're stuck with how it is. And you can be stuck and upset, which makes it twice as bad. Or you can find a way to be stuck and adjust what you expect to be more in line with reality. In some ways, to adjust your expectations are to remember that, success falls on a continuum. That, you may not have been able to have saved all the houses from the fire, or all the patients from the pandemic, or gotten all the homeless into services. But did you save 10 of the houses, 20, 30? Did you get 5 people off the streets and into services? Did you save a third of your patients? And they're now alive, right? That's not nothing. Success falls on a continuum. You don't want to fall into the all or nothing. Either I save everybody or it's no good. Either it's perfect or it's no good, right? You don't want to think that way, because A, it's not true. And second of all, it's not helpful. And remember what we talked about in the earlier modules, right? Your self-talk, what you say to yourself as well as what you say to other people, has to be true, but it also has got to be helpful. It's got to be realistic and supportive. Plus, you can only personally feel responsible and guilty for those things that you personally have control over. What you do, what you say. You have no responsibility over how other people react. You have no responsibility over the thoughts and the emotions that might spontaneously arise. You have no control over the fact that you are human, have always been human, will always be human, which means you're not perfect. You'll need rest. You'll need sleep. You will not be able to go forever. And you're going to make mistakes sometimes. You work to make them as rare as possible. You work to make them as harmless as possible. And you accept that you do the very best you can while not being perfect. So that's the first thing, is really look at what are you expecting of yourself, of other people, of the situation, of life, of the world, right? And here's a wonderful tip for broadening your perspective about something. So right now, think about something that you're not real happy about. This is what I think of as the 3 ways question. So start out and write down 3 ways that it could be better. What would you rather have be happening? Or, what would you rather not be happening? Or, what do you want different? Right? So I'm going to sit here and give you time and write down 3 ways that some current situation that's upsetting to you or stressful to you could be better. And again, when you're done, just go and write yes in the chat. So this is where you get to vent. This is where, you get to say what you'd like. That isn't true. It's not happening, right? And you get to complain. I'm a great believer in venting and letting yourself have a temper tantrum, right? Good. Having done that, now step back and look at it from an entirely different perspective and write down 3 ways in which the situation, however imperfect, could have been much, much worse than it is. Comparing the present. You're not saying how might it get worse in the future. It's like, this is how it is. Here are the 3 ways that I wish it was better. But you know what? Actually, if I broaden my perspective, even though it's not perfect, it could have been actually much, much worse. And notice as you write that down, what happens? How do you feel? Is there a shift in your thinking? Is there a shift in your emotions? Is there a shift in your body? I love that. A weight is lifted. Yeah. Because when we're looking at just at what's wrong, it narrows our focus to just that. When we look at, okay, it ain't great, but you know what could be so much worse? I have a wonderful daughter. She is the light of my life. She's been fabulous. And there were times during her teenage years when things were a little bumpy. And I would say to myself, okay, I'm frustrated about this, this, and this, but she's not, whatever, running away. She's not psychotic. She's not, you know, screaming and cursing and being violent with us. You just broadening that perspective helps everything. In cognitive behavioral terms, it's called decatastrophizing. It's simply opening up, looking at the perspective. Not saying that it's perfect, it's not. But it's saying between perfect and where it is, there's also could have been even worse. And that's incredibly calming. Good work. Nice guys. All right. And then here's another way to broaden your perspective, which is to time travel to the future and imagine that it's 5 years or 10 years from now. And you're looking back. What lessons will you want to take from this situation that you'll have 5 or 10 years from now? And how can you think about it and cope with it and act in a way that will give you as much peace, pride, and satisfaction as possible looking back? I'll give you a minute to think about that. The lesson might be, it was hard, but I was there for the people who were important to me. Or it was hard, but I made a difference. I couldn't save everybody, but more people were saved because I was there. It might be, I did the best I could and I learned compassion for myself and other people. So you can broaden the perspective in the present, and you can broaden the perspective from taking a view, looking back from the past and looking ahead to the future. And finally, you can change what you tell yourself. You change the words you use. We're back to your thoughts, your self-talk, your words should be, yes, realistic, but also as supportive as possible. Yes, true, and also as helpful as possible, right? Because again, words program the brain and the body. Our narrative about what's going on has a huge impact about how we feel about it and about its impact on us. Between what happens on the outside and how we react gets filtered through what we tell ourselves. So think about what you tell someone that you loved, someone that you were training, someone that you were mentoring, right? If you had a wise mentor, a wise advisor, what would they say to you about this stressful situation? And acknowledge the bad. This is not rainbows and unicorns BS. That doesn't cut it. It's acknowledging the bad and at the same time thinking, how could I think about this in a broader way? Thinking, how could I find perhaps the potential good? How could I create or draw from the negative a potential good? What positives could possibly come from this or that I could create from this? What lessons can I learn? Because we grow not from the good times in our lives, although they're wonderful. We grow from the hard times and from coming to terms with the hard times and thinking about them effectively. The third thing you can do is you can just practice protective physical self-care, because stress increases adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormones, the sympathetic nervous system fight or flight response. And you want to there are physically things that you can do that bring those hormones down. Everything from physical exercise, yoga, tai chi, qigong, any of those. The 4 for calm, diaphragmatic breathing. I think somebody's microphone is on. Mindfulness, mindful meditation, being mindfully aware and connected with the present, using imagery, meditation, prayer. And if we were to take a second now and just, I'm going to give you a minute, and I'll time, so don't worry. And you can open or close your eyes. But you could either breathe through the diaphragm, counting 1 to 4 in, and even slower 1 to 4 out. Or you could just go off in your mind to a beautiful place of safety, where there's nothing to bother you, nothing to disturb you. Or you could do a quick meditation or a prayer of gratitude, or sending love and compassion out to others. And just allow yourself to enjoy that experience right now. It's just a minute. I'm timing. There's nothing you have to do. Nothing to bother you. Nothing to disturb you. And now start to come back and just bring with you the good feelings. And notice how that felt as we move on. But give yourself the gift of breaks like this. So we've talked about ways you could maybe lessen the negatives so they're lighter. But in the meantime, let's do some things to add in the positives to our lives. Sound good? Okay, so back to, right, how often are you feeling these emotions? And what makes you feel them? Right? What triggers gratitude or appreciation or awe or wonder? When I was living in San Francisco and commuting to Fremont to work on my 12-hour day, I'd walk out 9 o'clock at night, 8:30, pretty exhausted, having gotten up at 5. But I made it a point to stop, and I had to force myself, stop and look up at the night sky. Just for a few seconds. To notice the beauty of the tree limbs against the sky, the stars, the moon. Right? What gives you these emotions? Now, positive emotions are less strong than negative emotions in general, so they need to be more frequent. Okay? And your experience of positive emotions can be developed. So, here are some ways to do that. We're going to talk about 5 ways to increase positive emotions. One is by just simply noticing and savoring the positives when they occur, because they don't grab our attention the way a negative does. A second way is using the power of gratitude, thankfulness, appreciation. A third is kindness in relationships. Fourth is using your strengths. And the fifth is using your strengths in the service of something that's bigger than you, that has meaning and worth. So let's take them one at a time. So there's a way to notice the positives. There's a there's a technique, Martin Seligman, who's a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania, was sort of one of the founders of the positive psychology movement. He called this the 3 blessings technique. I call it the 3 good things, whatever phrase you want to use. But you stop and you deliberately think about, well, what was good that happened today? Did someone smile at you? Did someone let you in to traffic? Did someone offer to bring you coffee? What about that first cup of tea if you're a tea drinker? Did someone go out of their way? Did somebody give you a hug or tell you that they appreciated what you did? Right? What were 3 good things that happened? And they don't have to be big. Actually, they're better off if you focus on the little ones. And then, as you talk or you write about this, think about what you did that made each one of those good things possible. That if someone gave you a hug, maybe it was in response to something that you said, something that you did, because of who you are with them, because of the relationship that you've cultivated. How have you contributed? So start noticing the positives, because they kind of go under the radar for us. And you want to shift your attention to grab them. It's a great topic of conversation over the dinner table or at night, maybe with your kids. And when you notice them, savor them. Remember, somebody gives you a compliment and it's like, oh, great, no, right? Or maybe you even demur, oh, it wasn't a big deal. No, stop, smile, look them in the eye and say, thank you. And then go write it down. And then go tell somebody else who will say, that's fabulous, you really deserved it, right? Get somebody to share your joys with. As a psychologist, if I was having a difficult day, I would just start to think, what am I doing? I don't help anybody, and I began to keep a list of positive comments that my clients, my patients would say to me. So I would remember them, because the negatives stick. That tends to be our default. The positives can slip away. Grab them, keep them, enjoy them, bask in them. Physically luxuriate. Remember, I talked about protecting yourself physically through yoga and exercise and those. This is another way to protect yourself physically. Maybe that take a few seconds, like in the shower, to just feel that hot water and all the muscles relaxing and just how good that feels. Or the smell and the taste of the coffee or the tea or the juice, right? Let yourself be completely present, immersed, absorbed in something that's happening. And marvel at the fact that we are alive, and isn't that a miracle? So notice and savor the positives in your life. Make it a point. And now, expressing gratitude. This is a twofer. When you express gratitude to someone else, you feel better, they feel better. Now, here's the caveat. It has to be sincere. If you're not sincerely thankful, you're better off saying nothing. But you can tap into the fact of really thinking they don't have to put a smile on their face. If they're doing their job well, think about how we rely on so many people, right? Think about the network that makes our lives and our functioning possible. Everything from the people who raise food, the people who deliver products, the people who manufacture, the the scientists who create, the researchers who find medical interventions, the people who are trying to do their best to make the world a better place. And then just in small ways. I remember leaving a conference center, and there was someone working, a gardener, planting flowers, and it was early spring and the flowers were blooming. It was really beautiful. And I stopped and I bent down and I said, "Thank you. The flowers are just beautiful." And their face lit up. And it's one of my favorite memories. So really think about how much you owe to other people. Well, owe is sort of a negative word, but how much other people help you. And deliberately focus on what you have, not what you don't have. I had a parent-in-law who developed Alzheimer's. And I focused over and over on how grateful I was and how lucky we were that the parent recognized us, was still loving. There were other losses, but I could focus on the losses or I could focus on what we had. You focus on what you have gratitude and appreciation. You focus on what you don't have, or what you've lost, or what other people have that you don't have, and all you create are negative feelings. Right? How often do you say sincerely, "Thank you," to somebody? Yeah, and think about all the ways that people help you. The people who clean, the people who maintain your computer, the people who do their jobs well without complaining. Yeah, none of this is guaranteed. None of this is got promised to you, right? And when you make a decision, when you make a purchase, when you decide something, be at peace with the decision. Accept it and move on. Don't go back and second guess or rethink, particularly if you can't change it. So it's a real focus on gratitude and appreciation for what you have, as a way of increasing the positive, and also as a way of avoiding the sadness, the anger, the jealousy, the bitterness that can come if you focus on what you don't have. So, right? What's that look like in action? It means you praise everything you can find to praise, right? You acknowledge explicitly other people's strengths. And you do the same thing for yourself, right? You want to be your own cheerleader, your own coach, your own support. That's going to nourish you and nurture you and strengthen you. It's going to keep putting gas in your tank. And there's some research that indicates that it takes at least 5 positives to outweigh 1 negative. So think about how you talk to the people around you, the people that you serve, the people in your life, your friends, your loved ones. And we're not talking about being inauthentic. We're talking about choosing where you put your attention so you can authentically notice and verbalize the positives about yourself and about everybody else. Because that leads to kindness, forgiveness. It leads to positive, supportive social relationships. And those are a huge supporter of happiness and a huge buffer against burnout. There was research where they found that close personal relationships increase happiness to the equivalent of a $130,000 increase in salary. I mean, if you've already got enough to live on, right? It would take that much more money to give you the increase in happiness that you're going to get from close, positive, supportive relationships. And you create close relationships by giving and receiving favors, doing things for other people, and allowing them to do things for you, offering help and accepting help, giving praise and gratitude, accepting praise and gratitude, being kind. How do you show kindness? And what kindnesses are shown to you? I remember standing in line when I was, I think, home from college, maybe, or maybe just in high school. And I was so excited. It was this famous pianist I really wanted to see. And I'd gotten there early. I'm standing in line, and the line opens, and I suddenly realize I was too young. I didn't have a credit card. I didn't have enough money, and I didn't have a checkbook. And I wasn't going to be able to buy a ticket. And the stranger in front of me turned around and gave me the money for an orchestra seat. What kindnesses have you had in your life? And what kindnesses are you paying forward? Right? We know that kindness reduces stress, compassion reduces stress, forgiveness reduces our stress. There's a study that George Valent made of starting with men in college and then later adding women, but studied these people through their entire lives. So we're talking 60, 70 years continuing to study these people. And one of the things that was correlated with a long and healthy and happy life was the answer to the question, is there someone that you could call, that you would feel comfortable calling, that you could call at 4 a.m. to talk to if you needed to? Do you have a close relationship? Right? And think about, how do you respond to other people's doubts and fears? Are you supportive? Are you sympathetic? Can you listen? Or are you getting into the yes, but, or oh, you shouldn't, or, right? And how do you respond to others' accomplishments? When you enthusiastically support others, when you join in their joys, you build a bond. And again, this is, you feel better, they feel better, right? So you get to highlight what they did that allowed them to reach that accomplishment. So there are a number of things that you can do that create positive social relationships. And we all need relationships, even introverts, even those of us who are shy. You can still start to use these tools and create a network, a safety net. So we've talked about noticing the positives and savoring them. We've talked about expressing gratitude and thankfulness and appreciation. We've talked about creating positive relationships. So now let's talk about something else, something called flow. Okay? When do you just lose track of time? When are you caught up in the experience? When would you, as Joseph Campbell would put it, when do you follow your bliss, right? When do you get so absorbed? What do you do that gets you so absorbed that you lose track of time, that you're outside yourself, right? You are probably using your strengths, your innate strengths, your talents, your abilities when you're doing that. So, right, what comes naturally or easily to you? I have a sister who's a portrait artist, and she began doing art in, I don't know, high school at least, maybe middle school. It just pours out of her, comes naturally to her. I have another sister who's always been very athletic. She teaches Pilates, and she's been, a nurse and a physical therapist. She's, done these kinds of things. Me, I'm completely talentless when it comes to any kind of art. And I'm not really that physical, but I'm really good at picking up on how people feel and understanding science and putting it into words that people can understand. What are you good at? Do people gravitate to you because you're good at explaining things? Are you good at teaching? Are you good at learning? Do you enjoy learning something new? Are you engaged in art, in beauty, in music? Are you a gardener? Do you create beauty in that way? Are you physical? Are you a dancer? Do you marathon? Are you good at organizing things? Are you good at writing? What's your strength? Right? And now, take what you're good at. I also like music. Started playing the piano when I was a kid, sang in choirs. So one of the things that I did throughout all the time that I was at Kaiser was every year at the end of the year, I would take the music from some song, Broadway musical or something, and I would write words that celebrated everything that happened in our department that year. Right? For me, that was fun. What's fun for you? What are you good at? And now, take your talents and think about how can you use them. And not only how can you use them, but how can you use them in the service of what has value to you? Looking at the eulogies of people over the course of human history, as far back as we can find eulogies, looking at the core values in every religion that has been sustained over time, looking at the civic virtues celebrated in cultures that have been successful for long periods of time, right? Researchers, primarily Chris Peterson, found basically 6 almost universal values, right? That love and humanity was valued. Maybe you're particularly caring. Maybe you do a lot for other people, or maybe your strength is gathering knowledge, wisdom. I know people who are always reading the latest biography, the latest scientific journal, right? Or maybe you've got people who just have an exquisite sense of fairness. Maybe you're one of those people who, seeing that things are done properly and appropriately and with justice, really resonates for you. That's a core value for you. We celebrate courage. physical courage and moral courage to say and do what's right, to say and do what's necessary. And here's a value that isn't strongly celebrated in our media, at least, but the value of balance, perspective, self-control, modesty, the absence of narcissism, the absence of the big egotist who everything's got to be about him. And then there's a final value of just transcending the present, whether it's looking to the future and creating, looking to the future with hope, whether it's having faith, whether it's creating the good out of bad. So you may resonate to all of these, but there may be a handful of them, maybe one or more, that really speak to you. Like if you had to base your life on this, this is where you would base your life. So for example, when I was trying to figure out what to do, I'd had one life plan and it fell apart and I was at a standstill and had to rethink what I was going to do with my life. For me, the basis was, if I can do something that increases another person's capacity to give and receive love, that has worth and value, inherent, intrinsic worth and value. Even if 2 minutes later they walk out the door and get killed, right? What has that kind of intrinsic worth and value to you? And how are you, or could you be, using your talents, your strengths, what comes easily and naturally to you in the service of those values? When you're your best self, what are you doing? Right? Are you teaching? Are you being courageous? Are you physically going on despite exhaustion? Are you continuing despite discouragement? What are your strengths? And how are you using them? And I want you to take a second and really write that down. I'm going to give you a minute. And when you've done that, just write yes. So it could be the knowledge you have. It could be your physical strength. It could be your courage. It could be your perseverance. It could be your willingness to, at least when appropriate, put other people's needs first. It could be you're the one that brings in cupcakes to everybody. It could be, you're the one that brings flowers. You could be, what do you do? Think about what you do, what you're doing in your life, and how that makes a difference, how that makes the world better. Because if you're doing something that's hard and stressful, if you also know why you're doing it, and if you can find ways to tap into your talents and your strengths and use your skills, that makes it less stressful. Good. And just kind of think, how often are you the person you want to be? The friend, the partner, the parent, the child, the coworker. What are you pleased with and proud of? What do you do that gives you a sense of true satisfaction? Like, if they videotape that, I would be good with it. Yeah, I'm proud of that. That's me being my best self. And what could you do more of? Or less of, maybe? So take a second and write that down, because just noticing, remember noticing the positives and savoring them? I want you to really notice. I want you to write down when you're really your best self, the kinds of things you do that give you satisfaction and pride, or a sense of achievement, or a sense of contentment, or joy. And when you've done that, just put yes in the chat. Good. 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 So in the last remaining minutes, we've got 19 minutes to go, okay? Some really interesting research on how people approach their work, their career, their profession, okay? And what they found was that it didn't matter what type of work you did, from janitors to judges, right? From garbage collectors to physicians, right? The majority of people approach their work in one of three ways. And the first one was, it's a job. I clock in, I clock out. I take all the vacation I can get. I do it for the money, and I live outside my work. I do it for the money, for the family. I do it for the money because I got to pay the mortgage, the rent, whatever. It's just a job. My life happens outside. Even if that's the case, you might start to think about, is there any way that you can use some of your talents in that job to make it a little more fun? So, a job. Second way is, well, it's a career. I've got a career path. I'm going to go for more money. I'm going to go for the prestige. I'm going to go for an advancement. I want the promotion. But again, and that's more engaging, more satisfying, but it can also feel like an endless treadmill, like a rat race. And you can start to think, well, why? Why am I doing this? So it can just be a job, and your activities outside work are where you make a difference. It could be a career and you're moving forward, or regardless of type of work, remember, you can approach your work as a calling. You're not working just for the money. You're not working just for the prestige or the promotion. You see the ways in which what you do contributes to a greater good. You see the ways in which your work is part of a larger purpose that has obvious value. And ideally, your work uses your strengths and your talents, or you can create ways in which to bring your strengths and your talents into your work, onto the job, with your coworkers, with the people that you interact with. So that at least some of the time, it's just intrinsically fulfilling. Okay. So it's interesting because what we've just talked about, which comes from the positive psychology research, is absolutely parallel to what they found when they studied healthcare professionals who were resilient. What did they report? I find gratification in my job. I look for things that give me satisfaction. I focus on the positive, acknowledging that there's negative, but I choose to focus on the positive aspects. I want to continuously develop, to grow, to use my talents, to encourage my skills. I get a balance of work and leisure. Help others, take care of me, care for them, care for me, and put boundaries between professional life and personal life, right? You can't be perfect. You can't do it all. You do have to take care of yourself. And now we're back to like first module, right? Stress management, taking care of yourself. So let's talk about, all right, we've talked about bringing positive emotions. And yeah, they feel good, but you know, is there anything else positive about them? Well, if you remember, we talked last in module 3, we talked about emotional contagion, that we pick up other people's emotions and that they pick up emotions from us. So the more we are able to fill ourselves with optimism, calm, compassion, caring, hope, the more the people around us pick up on those emotions. Talk about being a force for good, right? And then they've done research and they just find that if you're negotiating, if both people are in a good mood, they're more cooperative, there's less conflict, and they end up with agreements that both people benefit from. They're more creative and everybody wins. If you're a group leader and you have more positive emotions, right? Emotional contagion, everybody else feels better and the group is more cohesive and tends to put forth more effort. When you're more positive, you tend to be better decision makers. They gave doctors a very challenging differential diagnosis and gave some of them some chocolate before they tackled the diagnosis. And they had a higher rate of the right diagnosis. So you might want to bring chocolate next time you go to see your doctor and you've got a problem. People who are positive come up with more innovative problem solving. Remember how I talked about anger and fear narrows your thinking? Well, positive emotions broaden your thinking. So win-win agreements are likely. New creative solutions are more likely. Innovative problem solving is more likely, because you get cognitive flexibility, this openness, this freedom. Plus positive emotions, right? They release positive hormones. They calm down the negative stress hormones. So what do you, creativity, better problem solving, more productivity, more success. People who are generally positive tend to have higher incomes, more promotions, and take better health and care of themselves, live longer, and have happier marriages. So like positive emotions are kind of like good for what ails you. So it's worth doing things deliberately, the things that we've talked about, to increase the frequency, the duration, the range, the intensity of the whole universe of positive emotions in your life, from contentment to exhilaration, to calm, to joy, to laughter, to happiness, to compassion, to forgiveness, to kindness, to gratitude. So this module just covers a whole lot. And I know that Brian Hanley's going to put it up one day, so they're going to find a way to make it available to you. It is being recorded. I encourage you to go back and watch this again, maybe skimming to those points that have real relevance for you, and then taking time to really reflect and begin to take one tool after another. But right now, write down at least one specific action that you're going to take to help prevent personal burnout. And just put yes when you've done that. It could be you're going to start to talk about the 3 good things of the day. Or it could be that you're going to make a plan to try and change things. Or it could be that you're going to practice more exercise or more meditation, more acceptance or mindfulness. So it could be you're going to ask for help, or it could be that you're going to express appreciation more. It could be you're going to think about your talents and make sure you got them in your life, in your work life if possible, outside work if not. Good. So something very specific that you're going to do and why. Maybe are you going to savor that shower or I've got a mattress heater, so I turn on. So get into bed, it is warm. It's just, ah, can't tell you how nice that is, right? What things can you savor in your life, right? The cup of coffee, the first bite of something tasty. And how can you make this just part of your routine? Because it's just like exercise is a lot more likely to get done as if it just becomes part of the routine. If the clothes are in the car and you stop there on the way home, or you know, um, if you walk every day or every week at the same time, be like Pollyanna. Yes, in the sense of looking for the positives, acknowledging the negatives. This is never about denying the negatives. In fact, if anything, it's about looking at the negatives and saying, because there are negatives, I need to actively take care of myself. But yeah, always good and bad. Where are you going to put your attention? So how can you make this just part of your routine? So it's just like brushing your teeth, right? Just like something you do every day. And who can you tell who's going to support your plan? Because they did a study of people who carried out New Year's resolutions. And if you just thought it, about a month later, I think fewer than 10% had actually done anything at all. If you wrote it down, just wrote it down, I think it bumped up to 30%. And if you wrote it down and you told somebody, this is what I'm going to do, in motivational interviewing, that's called making a public commitment, particularly if you tell somebody who's going to support you, not going to discourage you and not going to criticize you, but he's going to really actively support you, then I think, it was like 60% of people are carrying out those New Year's resolutions a month later. So think about what you want to do, how you're going to do it. So make it just routine. It's easy. It's just part of life, and why you want to keep it up, and who are you going to tell? And if you've got any great ideas that you feel like sharing, please go ahead. I am always looking for great ideas to make life better. And think about, when are you going to do it? How, where, who are you going to thank? What kindness are you going to do? What positive are you going to savor? When, how, right? Because the work you do is valued and valuable, and you're valuable, and you are worth taking care of. So how many of you have a plan? You've settled on one thing, at least one thing that you're going to do. It's doable. You figured out when, where, why, how, who you're going to tell. And if you're interested in learning more, here are some books. These are the books out of the positive psychology research. So either of these books by Dr. Martin Seligman, Authentic Happiness or Flourish. If you're interested in the neuroscience underlying this, Stephen Klein's book, The Science of Happiness. If you're much more of a practical, just lay out a a smorgasbord of tools, lay out a buffet of tools and let me pick, then The How of Happiness by Sonia Lyubomirsky might be your cup of tea. There's a wonderful little book by Robert Hammonds just about gratitude, because it's such a wonderful tool, called Thanks. And then if you want to know more about the brain and how it works and some of the defaults to, cognitive narrowness versus flexibility, the book by Daniel Kahneman is absolutely fabulous. It's a great read. It's full of practical information. I can't recommend it too highly. It's right up there along with Intuition at Work by Gary Klein that I recommended earlier in one of the earlier modules. If you want to learn more about deliberately changing emotions, you might want to take a look at either Mind Over Mood by, it's Greenberger. It's Greenberger. Sorry, Dennis Greenberger and Christine Podesky, or The Feeling Good Handbook by David Burns. Or if anxiety, stress, panic, fear are an issue, I've got a workbook, Overcoming Anxiety and Panic Interactive Guide. And if you're interested in more positive psychology techniques, go to the website of the University of Pennsylvania, authentichappiness.sas.upenn.edu. There are questionnaires that you can take. It talks about different skills and different tools. Great. And people are going to do maybe time management to get the obligation smooth, right? So just run smoothly. Anything we can make as a habit takes less energy, less thought, less effort, and identify the joy spots and really focus on them and maybe try to increase them, grow them. Oh, I'm so glad. Great, you liked it. I love teaching this. So I wanted to give you enough time to write down that URL. I wanted to thank you. There were the other modules. And it has been my honor, it's been my pleasure to talk with you for these 4 modules of a whole psychological first aid, stress and preventing burnout class. I've enjoyed it so much, and I hope you have as well. I wish you all the best. Thank you. Thank you. You're very kind. Great. Great. Wonderful. Good. 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 I hope you return to these ideas over and over. They can only benefit you and everyone around you. And the more you think about them, the more you apply them. The deeper the understanding, the more the benefit. If there are any questions, feel free to share. Feel free to share these materials. I know that Ryan Hanley, Wendy Sewer, and others are going to be working to make this webinar series widely available, not only to those of you who are able to attend now, but to others in the future, to make this a resource. Because that's the whole purpose, is to share the information and the skills with you, for you to share with others, or just a spreading pool, making a difference in the world. Thank you so much for your attention. And And those of you who missed one, reach out to Brian Hanley. There are not any CEUs available, at least not at this time. The Dropbox will remain accessible with the recordings and the worksheets. And I know that we're going to be collaborating on finding ways to make it as widely available as possible. I'm delighted that people found it helpful, informative. Thank you so much for coming and for your attention. I wish you all the very, very best. And thank you again for everything that you do.